not a big believer in fate. I'm not a big believer in magic and hocus pocus and all of that good stuff and the universe aligning together. But September 30th, all worlds seemed to collide. Last year I woke up on September 30th, which is my birthday, and I go to Twitter because the first thing I do when I wake up is pull out this phone and do everything for this network. And I don't think we were 24 hours yet. No, we couldn't have been. So I wake up on this day last year, and I look at Twitter and I see everybody talking about International Podcast Day, and I thought, what in the world is International Podcast Day? Well, it turns out that September 30th is indeed International Podcast Day. My birthday, International Podcast Day, and now Podcrawl, all on the same day this year. If that's not an omen that this network is taking off, then I don't know what the hell is. I am Brian Crawford. I am the master of the Millvale Shore, and you are here at riversedgepgh.com, powered by NJL WebTech. Honest, practical, and affordable. Go to njlwebtech.com for all your web servicing needs. It's an unfortunate day in Pittsburgh sports. In fact, I would argue it's probably the worst day in Pittsburgh sports, at least this year. And I'm here drinking an Arnold Palmer iced tea in memory of the late, great golfer, Arnold Palmer. And I was going to talk a lot about what he has done here locally, especially in where I grew up, out in Westmoreland County. And we probably will talk about that throughout the show. But I want to get Matt Gajtka on here in just a minute. He was he's supposed to call in at 10:15. So we're going to talk to him about the Pittsburgh sporting weekend, which was a disaster. A disaster! I went on football in high heels. I'll talk about that in a little bit. I'll tell you now. I went on football in high heels, and I made a prediction about the Steeler game, and boy, was I wrong. Wow. Not a good game for the Steelers. Bad weekend all around for the Pirates. For Pittsburgh Sports. The Pirates, they lost. The Steelers lost. Pitt lost. Everybody lost. Really bad day for Pittsburgh sports. But Arnold Palmer had such a big influence on the Latrobe area, which is out in Westmoreland County. Probably one of the nicer towns in Westmoreland County. I always enjoyed going out to Latrobe, getting a drink at Sharky's. And an interesting thought, I don't know who meant more to Latrobe. Was it Arnold Palmer, or was it Steelers training camp? And that sounds like that might be a joke, but really, go to Sharky's any Steelers Sunday, and you cannot find a seat in the place. It's electric. And it's interesting because you compare that to the city. I would actually argue that the crowd for a football game, a Steelers football game at Sharky's, is way crazier than the crowd that you would get in Pittsburgh at a bar for the same game. Conversely, you go out to Sharky's for a Penguin game, and the Penguins score, and about 30 seconds later, everyone goes, woo! Because they weren't paying attention, and they saw the game on replay. But there's so much named after Arnold Palmer in Latrobe. The airport, for example. There's a car dealer. Everything just seems to be named after him, and I guess it makes sense. The guy changed the way that we view golf. He won 7 majors. He won the Masters 4 times, the U.S. Open. He's won the Open. He's won. He's a winner, and he's from Latrobe. He's done a lot in the area, and we got Matt Gajtka on the phone right now. We're going to talk to him about Arnold here. Hello, Matt. Are you there?
Yes, let's talk to Matt. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Today, or yesterday rather, would you say that this past weekend may have been, or is probably, in my opinion, the worst day in Pittsburgh sports this year?
This year, yeah, if you combine a whole bunch of things. You're saying just Sunday or the weekend? Sorry.
The weekend, with the passing of Arnold Palmer, the Steelers game, the Pirates' last game, Pitt. It just seems like everything came together to just one heaping pile of dung.
Yeah, I would agree with that for the most part, and the Penguins weren't involved in that situation. Although I guess you could say they had Nick Bonino get hurt at a scrimmage on Sunday at Cranberries. So
Well, that's not good. I did not know that.
no, it's not. But we'll see on the severity of that. But that was a difficult one, and even going outside the sphere of Pittsburgh sports, the death of Marlins star pitcher Jose Fernandez, as announced or revealed Sunday morning, that might have been the biggest kick in the stomach for me, just personally as a general sports fan, because he was a player who was already great, but was going to be one of the all-time greats, I have no doubt, and to have him taken away, that hurts at a different type of a level than, say, a typical loss, whether it be football or baseball. And even Arnold Palmer, at 87 years old, I think we all realized we had limited time left with Arnie, and he had a full life. Boy, did he ever.
Well, it's
but
funny.
With Fernandez, it's almost like that one stung me the most.
Yeah, that was definitely a shocker. And it's funny you mentioned that about Arnold Palmer, because when I heard the news last night, the first thing I thought was, oh, that's terrible. And then I thought for a second, well, no, it's not. He was 87 years old. He had a great life. Like, if I can make it to that age and live that kind of life, that's not really a terrible thing. It was maybe surprising because you didn't, hear about his health all the time in the news, but it wasn't really that, if you think about it, it really wasn't that awful. I mean, it was awful. You never would have seen anyone die, but he lived a good life.
He did. And when I was out at Oakmont for the U.S. Open this year, which of course is in suburban Pittsburgh, and Arnie couldn't make it out to the tournament, that's when you realize things were probably pretty bad for him, just for the fact that it would be less than an hour drive from his home in Latrobe to Oakmont. So that made you start thinking, well, what's going on with him? And we didn't hear too much from his representatives or his side of things at all. So that worried me a bit, but then I forgot about it with everything going on during the summer after that. And sometimes older folks go through situations like that, and they pull through, and they have several years to go. But I think the one thing about Palmer's death that makes it a little more of a poignant thing, or more of an injury to all of us who love watching him, is that golf allows for a long, long career. And I didn't know him in his prime. I'm 31 years old, so I only knew him just a little bit on the senior PGA Tour and then his ceremonial appearances. But he had his own tournament on the PGA Tour down in Bay Hill in Orlando, Florida. And just until last year, he was still hitting the ceremonial opening tee shot at the Masters, Jack Nicklaus and Gary Player. Or maybe it was a couple of years ago that he stopped hitting it. But in golf, you have a much longer lifespan, so to speak, than other sports.
Sure. Now, what do you think Arnold Palmer's biggest influence was? Do you think it was on the Latrobe area, the golf game at large, or do you think it was the tasty beverage he concocted by adding lemonade and iced tea?
Well, I think his longest-lasting legacy might be the last thing you said there with the beverage. But you look back at when he made his money on tour, when he made his fame, when he became the most popular, golfer in the world. Golf was not a marquee sport, and now you see yesterday Rory McIlroy makes a putt for $11 million. So that tells you how far the game has progressed, and Tiger Woods gets a great deal of credit for that too. But before Tiger, who was definitely a people's champion and had the impact on culture because of his race too, but with Palmer, he made the sport accessible for blue-collar folks, and I'm fairly certain I wouldn't have grown up playing the game and loving the game without the existence of Arnold Palmer, because I didn't grow up with a silver spoon in my mouth. I didn't grow up in a country club, and so he popularized the game for people who weren't in the upper crust of society, which at that time, I know it's a people's game now, but it's instructive to remember or try to think back and imagine what it was like back then. Tennis and golf were country club sports, and now both of them are certainly mainstream, and we owe that transformation to some of the great stars who came along, and Palmer is foremost among them.
Talk about Jose Fernandez as we're talking about these athletes who passed this weekend. He had an interesting past. I didn't realize, I didn't know much about him, to be honest, because he was outside of the Pittsburgh realm. But I was very fascinated to read that he was actually somebody who fled Cuba and made it to the United States. And I felt like that almost, you never want to see anyone die again, but it almost made it seem more impactful that he didn't just have that silver spoon his whole life. He really was somebody who had an interesting backstory.
He sure did. And Cuba is becoming more accessible to major league teams as our relations as a country with Cuba have softened and have become more cordial and more cooperative over the years. But when Jose was growing up, which is just about 10 years ago, he was determined to come to America because he knew that there was no other way he was going to become, or he thought there was no other way he was going to become a major league pitcher. And he only played 1 year of minor league baseball. He was drafted in 2011, full year in 2012, and then made his debut in 2013 at 20 years old, and was dominant that first year. And his stuff was amazing. And if you're not a baseball fan, stuff means the quality of his pitches. The fastball hummed, the curveball was darting, and his personality just put the capper on it for me. He was so passionate about the sport. I always love to see the shots of him in the dugout celebrating his teammates' accomplishments. I think that told you a lot about how much he loved the game, and just enjoyed seeing other people do well and be well. So there's a double whammy to it, because not only was he a great pitcher at 24 years old, and he came back from arm surgery a couple of years ago to get right back to that level, even better than he was previously. But he still had 15 years left, and I have no doubt he would have been the best player in Marlins history and the best, or one of the best pitchers of his generation. But you look at his backstory, his enthusiasm, what he meant to that Miami community especially, which has so many Cuban immigrants and people of Cuban descent. It's a massive blow.
Yeah, definitely. Getting back to home and back to Pittsburgh, and we're going to have Matt Gribshaw. He's a professional golfer here locally. He's going to be on a little bit later to talk about Arnold Palmer and the impact that Arnold had on his life. But getting back to the local teams, what happened? I mean, what happened? Was it a full moon?
Well, with the Steelers, which I'm sure most people are concerned about today, I think most of us at least, were looking at that New England game in a few weeks and saying there's a good chance that the Steelers are 6-0 when they face the Patriots. And now they have the loss to their credit, and it was no ordinary loss. It was the biggest loss in terms of margin of victory since 1989 for the Steelers, which is amazing because teams have bad games, and that was certainly one of them. But it's crazy that they've never lost by as much as 32 since I was 4 years old, going way back to the 80s. But I think we all knew the defense was going to be a challenge, especially pass defense this year. But the whole unit underperformed yesterday. And then you throw in some injuries: Ryan Shazier, Mike Mitchell. The third one's escaping me, Lawrence Timmons. They all were removed from the game, and then you have a whole bunch of young players in the secondary. So not terribly surprised to see that result against a quarterback in Carson Wentz, who's taking the NFL by storm in his first year. However, the offensive performance would I think, discourage me more, because this was a team that, even without Le'Veon Bell, who they'll get back next week, and Martavis Bryant, I think we all thought they could average 25-30 a game, and they have to get close to that to give themselves a chance to win, considering their defensive deficiencies. And to score 3 points, it's really tough to score just 3 points in a professional football game these days. So that one, I think, has me wondering what's going on, the offensive performance, more than what happened on defense.
Yeah, especially after the last two games, because I thought that with all of the injuries and suspension, at first I thought, oh man, they're going to have a really rough time making it. And then they played their first two games, and I thought, oh, that's great. They may actually be able to make something of this season, despite everything thrown against them and things that they threw themselves into. But then yesterday happened, and now I'm back to wondering how they're going to do this year. It's like a roller coaster.
The one respite that the Steelers have is that it was, even though it's a game against your in-state opponent, and There's so many crossover folks in this state who, live between Pittsburgh and Philly, so you feel for the Steelers fans who are in the eastern side of the state today. But it was a non-conference game, non-division game. So it's about as low consequence as you can get in a sport where every game is relatively important compared to the other ones. You don't want to lose.
Sure.
And you don't want to lose a game like that when you only play in Philadelphia once every 8 years. But at the same time, you can rebound from those types of losses more easily.
Let's just touch base real quick on the other sports, and then I'll let you go. I know you got a busy day ahead of you.
Well, yeah, I'll talk a little bit about the Pirates then if I'm going to have the open floor. I was hesitant to write them off until you get to the final week and there's several games back of the playoffs, and they are now. And yesterday at PNC Park was one of the most sluggish baseball games I've ever watched, and there were 17 runs scored, and it still felt like a snooze just because of all the pitching changes and substitutions and replay delays. So pace of play is still a concern, and for the Pirates, their concerns are continue to be many, as one of their top pitching prospects, and Tyler Glass, now continues to have a difficult time with his arsenal and figuring things out at this level. So I think for this final week, we can finally put to bed they're still technically in it thought, and just look ahead to 2017. 4 games against the Cubs, stiff competition, best team in baseball this week, and then 3 at St. Louis, which is always a tough matchup no matter how the Cardinals are doing. So a test coming up for some of the Pirates rookies to continue to progress in their first year, and also for the veterans to keep their energy up and push toward the finish in what's been a very frustrating second half for all of them. Yeah,
it was disappointing because I felt this year I thought they had some things going for them, but just
they did.
wasn't working out. All right, Matt, thank you very much. Get yourself an Arnold Palmer and celebrate the life of a great southwestern Pennsylvania guy. So
I will, no doubt. And thank you, Brian, for having me.
As always, that's Matt Gajtka with your sports update here on the River's Edge.